So this is a practice question for FRQ number 2 on your exam, macro exam, which will be this Thursday. And I'm using the 2010 question number 1, long question number 1. I think it's the same as we did the 2010 number 2 in the previous video. So here we go. Assume that the United States economy is currently in long-run equilibrium. A, draw a correctly labeled graph of aggregate demand and aggregate supply and show each of the following. So you're not going to have to actually draw the graph, although you can if you want to include it. They're probably just going to ask you some things about the graph. So how would that graph be for part A? So part A, we're going to have scratch paper. And we're going to draw an ADAS graph. ADAS. This is the price level on the vertical, GDP on the horizontal. We've got aggregate demand, short-run aggregate supply, and we're in long-run equilibrium. So there's our LRAS. And there is, they wanted us to label this price level E and YE. So this is Y or output E, equilibrium, and price level E. Okay? All right. Part B. Assume the government increases spending on national defense without raising taxes. On your graph in part A, show how the government action affects aggregate demand. They would probably just ask you, describe what happens to the aggregate demand curve. And of course, aggregate demand is going to shift to the right, okay? And it's going to drive price level up. So B, AD increases, which is a shift right. And B2, how will this government action affect unemployment rate in the short run? So that was B1. B2 is unemployment rate will decrease, will decline, okay? Why? Because output increases, and that's all you have to say, because output increases. If you look at the answer key to this one, that's all they wanted you to say, because output increases. Okay? All right, part C. Assume the economy adjusts to the long-run equilibrium after the increase in government spending. So we've talked about this a lot. If we have an increasing price level, and we're beyond full employment output for a while, what's that going to do? It's going to cause inflation. Inflation is going to cause workers in their wages and people who sell raw materials to have to raise their prices. So that means that input prices are going to rise. And when input prices rise, the aggregate supply curve shifts back to the left. AS prime. Okay, and this winds up being our new price level. We'll call it price level 2. So what are they asking? How will short-run aggregate supply curve in the new long-run equilibrium compare with that in the initial long-run equilibrium? It'll shift to the left. Explain. It shifts to the left because input prices increase. The rate of inflation is higher than expected. Input prices increase. On your graph in part A, label the new long-run equilibrium as PL2. They would just ask you, is PL2 greater than, less than, or equal to PL1? And so in part C here, this is part C2, PL2 is greater than, or is an increase? We'll just say it's greater than PLE, price level, equilibrium price level from before, okay? D, in order to finance the increase in government spending on national defense, the government borrows funds from the public. Using the correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market, you could highlight that, show the effects of the government's borrowing on real interest rate. So the loanable funds market, in the previous video, we did the money market, which had the vertical supply of money. The loanable funds market, LF market, is the demand for loanable funds, LF, demand for LF, and the supply of loanable funds. This is not the supply of money. This is the supply of people who want to lend their money out. And that gives us an equilibrium interest rate. We'll call it I sub E. So this is interest rates, and this is the quantity of loanable funds on the horizontal axis here. Okay? When the government gets in to borrow more funds, it drives the demand for loanable funds to D prime and increases the interest rate. We'll call it I sub 2 here. Show the effect of the government's borrowing on the real interest rate. Real interest rates rise. So for part D, interest rate increases. E, given the change in real interest rate you just identified, what is the impact on each of the following on investment? Okay, well, we know when interest rates rise, investment spending falls. They ask you to explain this. What is the impact? No, they just ask you what's going to happen. Investment spending will fall. Okay, because borrowing is more expensive now. What's going to happen to the economic growth rate? So that was part I. This is part 2, II. The growth rate, that's an O. Growth rate is going to decline. Explain, why is the growth rate going to decline? With investment spending falling, that means that the stock of capital goods will not expand as fast as it would have, or may actually fall, and that will decrease the growth rate. So the words they wanted you to use from the answer key are as follows. 1 point is earned for explaining that the decrease in investment slows down capital formation. Good phrase. Slows down capital formation, or the stock of goods growth is slowed down, leading to a reduction in the economic growth rate. So that will be question number 2. You have 15 minutes to do the question, 5 minutes to upload, total of 20 minutes for question number 2. There you go.